what are you taking away from this, and what are you thinking about?
Just so you know exactly
If you want to check it out.
why we were doing what we were doing.
Bit about not having a centralized leadership.
Yeah.
You didn't want that to be part of your movement. You wanted to have that image that, as a togetherness, right? You're the 99% representing that. History has shown a lot of efficacy for revolutions that have a defined leader, a defined goal. Here's what we want, this is the way we get it, right? Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King, Gandhi. I mean, these are solid people whose very visage brings to mind the symbol of that revolution. And that's done a great amount of work and a lot of great progress for each of those. We see all of those kind of movements as relatively successful, actually, having actually some real results behind the efforts put behind it. So how do you guys want to attain that without that symbol? Because by and large, people are hardwired for seeing what's real, seeing what's solid, not an ambiguous idea. So how do you convey to somebody that this is a real thing without having a real visage?
I would counterpoint that isn't a giant group of people more real than an individual? I mean, I see where you're going, that people have been trained to look for leaders and look for hierarchy, but aren't millions of us on the streets more real than, say, the man in the White House? Not to pick on anyone, but it just seems like a convenient target, talking about American politics. Doesn't that seem a little bit more real?
True, but when people think of like the Bolshevik Revolution, they think of Lenin, right? They don't think of each individual person with a pitchfork and a torch.
I also feel like we're also in a time right now where we're past that information era and starting into the era of analysis. That people, when you go and watch Selma, it's no longer about Martin Luther King. It's about John Lewis. It's about all the people that were there on the streets. It's about, when people talk about the intersectional stuff, like Bayard Rustin did more for the movement than just about anyone, and because of his sexuality, he was excised from history at that time, and now not only is he back in history, but most people think of him as one of the most significant folks at that time. And, again, I think we're rethinking history in ways that hopefully we're going to stop being so hierarchical in our structural desires.
I was going to say, I think there are leaders in Occupy. I mean, when I think of Occupy, I think of specific individuals that I've either come to know or have seen speak or have seen involved in certain processes. So in New York, there's Justine McKinney,
Yeah.
and like other individuals who were behind the leadership there, although they themselves might have projected at one time that they were not leaders, and then later that they might have been. But also there are other leaders within Occupy, like Vermin Supreme, who runs for president, and Reverend Billy. There are people who definitely stand out and speak to their own platform. But in Occupy, I think the general consensus with Occupy is that's not necessarily the Occupy platform that Reverend Billy is speaking about. That's Reverend Billy's platform, and Reverend Billy is a proponent and a cog in the Occupy machine, but he is not the only one, and that's why I think it's so important to recognize that we are leaderless at the least. We can recognize people for their commitment, but not necessarily recognize them as leaders.
It's also kind of a global model too, like Greece has done it. I mean, there's all these movements that are interconnected. We were just talking about Tokyo, the Umbrella Revolution. There's a lot of movements without, especially lately. So maybe that idea of having a face to put to a movement is becoming archaic, you know what I mean? Because
Right.
especially these last 10 years, if you look at all of the major protest revolutions, we don't have any. But it's not just Occupy, like I said, it's the Arab Spring and Palestinian occupation and, you know, all of these other,
Chile
you know.
and Mexico.
Yeah, exactly.
Today,
And we
thousands
could-
of protesters were beaten and brutalized by the police up in
Right.
Ontario for
Right.
anti-austerity protests, and
Right.
those were students.
Yeah, but there were faceless students, or I shouldn't say faceless, but, you know, maybe that's just not a motto that we're,
And frankly, if we're gonna talk about pure community, Quebec was the ultimate win of the era, because they had, some nights, they had like 90% of the population out on the street. Historically, that's not just unprecedented, that's impossible from a political science point of view. But it just became a thing. You know, there'd be the, you know, old folks that weren't participating, they were just like, cool, everybody's hanging out in the streets, and they'd bring a card table out, and they'd play bridge and drink some drinks while everybody was protesting.
Yeah.
And it just became a thing that everybody would come out on the streets every night.
yeah.
Can we
Yeah.
give it to,
Can I ask a question?
oh, she had a question. Yeah.
Yeah, we have-
Oh,
I guess I was just saying, while I'm not like directly and like was never directly involved in Occupy, I feel like having a movement that is like quote unquote leaderless, in my mind is like, I don't know, in some ways more powerful than having like one central figure, because I know that, you know, while I don't want to criticize like influential leaders like Rosa Parks or Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., like there were fallbacks to like having Rosa Parks as the figure if there were like people coming before her, and then not being chosen by the NAACP because they
Right.
were like less qualified
Yeah.
to like stand for that movement, as well as like taking MLK as like the leader versus like Shuttlesworth might have been like doing more community action, and you know, while like Dr. King was very influential, and like I'm not trying to like knock him down at all.
No, you're right, though.
But he did like stand for a lot of the qualities of like the black elites of the time versus like, you know, the lower class African Americans might not have like
Yep.
been as aligned with him and his leadership, and might have had qualms with that versus Shuttlesworth or Rustin. And so I think that like something powerful about Occupy is that, you know, there aren't those leaders that are boosted up and seen as like these like holy, I don't know if
No,
holy
it's,
is the right
I
word,
hear
but
you. It's like a respectability thing in a way. There
Yeah.
were lots of black activists that you weren't taught about because they were on drugs, or they were GLBT community members, or this, that, and the other. There were plenty of communists that, you know, and socialists that didn't get to be the face of a movement that, you know, so I think that's definitely a strength, because we have so much diversity. We just don't want to ruin it by letting one person represent or, you know, speak for. It would just be devastating to those of us who that person doesn't represent, or, you know what I mean?
I ask a question. What did you say about being hardwired to see reality, or what was the term you used?
Yeah, so, I mean, people accept what they see, what they
Wait,
feel with their
okay, so
senses, right?
can I ask a question about that? Do you have religious beliefs?
Me?
Yes.
No.
Okay, so, but you know you're in a place that embodies that, and there are people all over the world that are willing to kill each other over those beliefs. And what I'm saying is, I think your contention about people being hardwired to see and know what is, you know, real might be a stretch.
I guess my point was having a solid thing to put an idea to is more effective than leaving it as an ambiguous sort of construct that doesn't have a physical basis.
I can kind of see where you were going with
Yeah.
the hardwiring. Like when we first started down on the plaza, the press had no idea who to talk to. They were
Yeah.
looking for the leader, and when they talked to some of you,
Yeah.
you became the leader,
Yeah.
whether you liked it or not.
Right.
And I think that kind of shows the hardwiring, at the least in our society, be it with
Right.
media.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's social conditioning.
Yeah, that's,
Social
that's
conditioning
gonna, yeah.
behind
More of
it.
an actual physiology.
Nonetheless, I'd rather stand beside thousands of people who I regard as my brothers, my sisters, my comrades, than by one person who I, believe is to be my God or my leader, or, I think there's a lot more power in that, and then you can choose who to recognize versus finding that one leader.
And I think that one important thing too, just real quick, is that, while that's the way that it's been done in the past a lot, I think that it's important to notice that, like, this sort of thing, we've realized that while it's worked in certain ways, it hasn't worked in a lot of other ways, so we're simply just trying something new in this regard, hoping that that will work better. I mean, the only thing that you can really do is try to change things, rather than, if racism is still a huge problem in this country, which it is, then we know that the Civil Rights Act, and having Martin Luther King as the face of it, while it was certainly, had a lot of positive influences, of course, it didn't solve the problem, right? So like it's kind of just another way to help try to do that, to help solve those problems. Women can vote, but that still doesn't mean that we're done with sexism, right? So, we are trying different tactics to try to solve all of these issues.
But
We're
it's not-
smarter together
Yeah.
than we are separately. So when you're in a hierarchy, you're limited